early contradictions against Jesus, ancient Judaism, Jesus, and virgin brides.
Jesus saved the children, and the Logos brought gnosis, divine wisdom from Sophia, so that you may know this.
Unknown to many Christians, as they're not taught this stuff, there are ancient criticism against Jesus and Christianity, such as the writings of Celsus, a 2nd century Greek philosopher and opponent against Christianity, and we have the writings of the Talmud. The Talmud being important Jewish scripture that was passed down orally, written around 400 to 500 BC, though not complete. We have two versions of the Talmud, being in Aramaic and Hebrew, and the Talmud would later be edited and added to in 70 AD and 300 AD, and even being forced to be edited by Christians that were persecuting the Jewish people, viewing it as blasphemous towards Jesus and his mother, Mary. In the Talmud, it mentions a man called Yeshu ben Stara or Yeshu ben Stada, meaning son of the unfaithful, who was later identified with Jesus, son of Pentara, or Jesus, son of a virgin, Pentara being a Roman soldier, a Roman Phoenician soldier, and this Yeshu was born of a Roman soldier out of wedlock by his mother, who in this account grew her hair long, though these accounts could also be another Jesus according to other scholars, depending on your view. Now, what's interesting here is within the writings of Celsus, he claims that Jesus was the son of a Roman soldier, Pentara. Pentara being a Roman Phoenician soldier that actually existed and would match the timeline of being the father of Jesus. Though we have no actual historical evidence for this claim, it is a theory. Now, this Roman soldier around Jesus' birth would have been aged 16 to 18. Mary would have been aged 14. Now, Celsus doesn't make it clear if it was a union of love or if it was an act of sexual assault on the Roman soldier's hand. Now, there are theories that people believe, even to this day, that Mary was sexually assaulted by this Roman soldier. Some people today even believe that they fell in love and was out of union. Now, the Talmud mentions that this Yeshu, whose mother was Mary, she was unfaithful to her husband as she grew her hair long and slept with a Roman soldier, giving birth to this Yeshu, who learnt his magic in Egypt and in turn misled the Jews to apostasy, and he himself worshipped idols. Now, here we can see that this is ancient criticism against Jesus. Now, Jesus was also crucified, and according to this Talmud, this Yeshu was hung up and also stoned, but he was killed on Passover just like Jesus was. So we can see here ancient criticism by the Jews against Jesus as well, as ancient Christians also wrote criticism against the Jewish people as well, and also persecuted them. And the Jewish people even persecuted early Christians, and even Greek-speaking Jews. These were the Zealot Jews that I'm referring to, though. So, this faction of Judaism does not exist anymore. Jesus was born around 6 to 4 BC, and he died around 33 BC on Friday on the 3rd of April. Now, the Roman soldier, Phoenician Roman soldier, Pentara, was born on 22 BC and he died in 40 BC. So making Pentara around the age of 54 of Jesus' death and around 16 to 18 of his birth. So what's interesting here is Paul did not mention Jesus' father. But we have the Ebionites of the 1st century that rejected Paul, that believed that Jesus' biological father was Joseph. So these names, Pentara and Joseph, appear around the same time, which was after Jesus' death. Now, one of the reasons for these claims, possible reason for these claims, is due to Jesus' non-violent stance against the Romans, as he preached non-violence, and many Jews of the time wanted liberation from the Romans and wanted a warlike Messiah to set free them from the Romans. Now, the Ebionites that rejected Paul, they also believed that Jesus' father was Joseph, and they revered James the Just, being Jesus' brother, and they also believed that Jesus was adopted by God, and not born of a virgin, and that he was adopted by God during his baptism by John the Baptist. And they also believed that Jesus and John the Baptist were vegetarians, as they were also vegetarian Jewish people. So during the time of Jesus, we had different versions of Judaism, and before the time of Jesus, Judaism was diverse as well. Now, where do the claims that Jesus was a magician or a sorcerer come from, and that he learnt his magic in Egypt? Now, if we look at early Christian art, we see Jesus with a wand or a staff. And Moses also used a staff. Now, staffs and wands were also revered as magical items. And it wasn't just the use of the said wand that was considered powerful, but it was the said individual's words or prayers that said made the wand or magic powerful, as it was a divine act. So a blessing from the divine, or a divine power being enacted through the user. Now, to be fair, many ancient Christians were diverse as well, having different beliefs in Jesus. Some believing in miracles, others believing in acts of magic, and that magic was also associated with said miracles, especially in the ancient world, as magic and miracles were a part of daily life. Now, the raising of Lazarus was also viewed by some Jewish people as black magic or as necromancy. Now, they of turn would have viewed this as Egyptian illusionary or as weird Jewish mysticism, as Judaism was diverse in its belief, theology, and in culture, and also in its understanding of the text. Now, within the biblical accounts, we also have the Jesus family fleeing to Egypt from Herod to protect baby Jesus. And it doesn't state how long they were there for. They only returned afterwards when Herod died. Now, it's possible that Jesus spent some of his childhood there, so this would give him time to learn Greek, Egyptian, as Greek was the main speaking language there at the time, and it would also give him a chance and time to learn mysticism, as mysticism was very popular in Egypt and Jesus was a mystic Jew. So what about the view of Jesus being blasphemous and leading the Jews astray? Well, during the time of Jesus, there were different types of Jewish people that had their own view of God and gods. Some worshipped one God but believed in other gods. And some worship Yahweh, others worship Yahweh and Asherah, others worship El, others worship El and Asherah and Yahweh, and others El and Yahweh, Yahweh being the son of El. Now, during the time of Jesus, there was no Bible. The Jews were arguing over whose text was correct, whose idea of God was correct. Now, the only complete Bible of Jesus' time was the Greek Septuagint, which had texts that were also rejected by some types of Jews. Now, during the time of Jesus, there were diverse beliefs regarding Judaism. Some Jews believed in the afterlife, others did not. And some did not believe in angels or spirits, and some did. Now, it wasn't until 200 BC that angels started having a name, and that there was no evidence before this for a reward or punishment system regarding after death. Many ancient Jews simply believed that the body would turn into dust. During the time of Jesus, the most dominant groups of Judaism, the most popular, were the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots, of which all had different beliefs. Now, Christians of today and many Jews are not taught this, so this will be regarded as seminary secrets. Now, the Sadducees only accepted the first 5 books of Moses. They did not believe in spirits, and they did not believe that spirits could possess people. Thus, they did not believe in spirits. They did not believe in angels, and they did not believe in the resurrection of the dead or an afterlife. They believed once the body died, the soul and body would turn into dust and ash. Now, the Pharisees accepted 24 books. They believed in the resurrection of the dead, and they believed in angels and spirits, and that spirits could possess people. Now, in regards to the resurrection of the dead, the Pharisees believed that the physical body would resurrect, and until then the soul would wait in Sheol until God brought forth the kingdom of heaven here on earth, and then would judge the soul. And if the soul was sinful, it would turn into dust or ashes. And if it was just and lived a good life, the soul would then be accepted into heaven. The Essenes were a diverse community, meaning they had different groups of Essenes with different beliefs. Now, the Essenes, of which believed that the soul was immortal, most of which rejected the body's resurrection, and rather believed that the soul would ascend to heaven and be judged, and if it lived a just, good life, it would be accepted into heaven, and if it lived a sinful life, it would simply be destroyed or made to reincarnate again. Now, in regards to the Essenes, they were vegetarians. Now, they worshipped El, the Most High God, of which some believe that was both male and female, an aspect of El and Asherah. Some worship El and Asherah. Others worship El and Yahweh, Yahweh being the son of El, such as recorded in the Dead Sea Scrolls, with Yahweh inheriting Israel from his father and patron god El, the Most High. Now, some of the Essenes were also apocalyptic, believing that the world was going to end at any moment, similar to the Zealots, of which some Essenes were also Zealots. Now, the Essenes had a much more extensive law, some of which accepted the Apocrypha that the Pharisees and Sadducees rejected. But this was not a part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, as this community did not accept the Apocrypha, so you had different versions of the Essene movement. The Essenes were a shared community. They also regularly baptized, believing that it was necessary to regularly cleanse oneself and to regularly purify oneself and to confess their sins to God. Now, the Essenes were known for fasting. They were vegetarians as well. They were known for the acts of poverty and were a shared community. Now, the Essenes also believed in spirits, and spirits could possess people. They had spells or magic that instead could be used to cast out said spirits. Now, the Essenes also believed in angels, and they believed that the soul was just. It in turn would live in heaven with the angels and God. Now, there were the Zealots as well, and the Zealots were a warlike faction, believing that the world was going to end, and in turn they could speed up the process to bring about the kingdom of God to overthrow the Romans. And we have here similarities with the Pharisees and Sadducees and Zealots as they worship Yahweh. Now, the Essenes of which worship El as the Most High. Now, some Zealots, being Essenes, also believed that Yahweh was the son of El, but Yahweh was the judger God. Now, amongst the Jews, some other Jews believed that there were multiple gods, but they only worshipped Yahweh or only worshipped El. Now, before the time of Jesus, Judaism was diverse, and there was no canon. There were diverse texts that many different Jews would read or pass on through oral traditions. Now, the first Bible, if you will, Jewish Bible, compiled together was the Greek Septuagint. Now, this is why we have text within the Septuagint that is rejected within the Jewish Bible and within the Christian Old Testament. Now, the Greek Septuagint was compiled in the 2nd century. This text was ordered to be compiled by Ptolemy, the king or pharaoh of Egypt, who was once a general of Alexander the Great. This work was done by 72 rabbis, 6 from each different tribes. Now, this text, because it was done by different Judean tribes, had diverse text that many other Jews did not accept and others did accept. So this is one reason that they claim the Greek Septuagint is one of the most dangerous books in the world, as it was also popular towards Christians, and it in turn would also be taken out of many Christian Bibles that don't use the Greek Septuagint, as in turn it was more popular for Gnostic Christians, as more Christians were becoming Gnostic Christians, or more Jews were becoming Gnostic Christians, so the Jewish people also stopped using the Greek Septuagint, and thus wanted to use the later Hebrew text. Now, originally, we did have the original Hebrew text that the Greek Septuagint did copy from, but these original texts have now been lost to time. So now with this explained, if you crucially study the text, you see the teachings of Jesus don't match up with the teachings of Yahweh, and that of the teachings of the Old Testament. We have here two different versions of the said deity, of the said God. Now, we have a loving, forgiving God and one who is jealous, one who is vengeful. Now, Jesus worshipped a different God to the Pharisees and Sadducees and the Zealots, and thus this is why they called him blasphemous. Now, another interesting thing to note is the Jewish people do not believe in the devil, and Jesus is the first in regards to Judaism to mention the devil, and the being he calls the devil was the God of the Pharisees and Sadducees, Yahweh, in John 8:44. He states that you worship your father who is the devil, and he's been a liar and murderer since the beginning. In regards to Satan, which is a title, not a name, it means adversary or accuser. Now, he is not the devil. In modern Judaism, he is an angelic being that serves Yahweh. His job is to seduce mankind away from God. Now, in the Pharisee belief and the Essene, some Essenes, and the Zealot communities, they believed in the ancient past that Satan was an angelic being that served Yahweh, and his job again was to seduce mankind away from God so that way mankind had free will. Now, he had a complete different role in regards to modern Christianity. Now, the role of Satan, in some cases within the Essenes, was the role of Yahweh, basically. So Yahweh would be the judger of human people for his patron god El, who is merciful and just and loving. So Yahweh would be ultra just, and this role would also be included to Baal, and in many cases Baal and Yahweh got merged together. Now, Yahweh, of which, like Baal, both of which were war gods. They were also storm gods and warrior gods. Now, Baal and Yahweh even took traits off of El to be the head pantheon god. Now, the worshippers of Baal and Yahweh also not only merged the titles of El in with their gods, Baal and Yahweh, but they also merged in El's wife, Asherah, with Baal and Yahweh. So both Baal and Yahweh were married to Asherah, and originally Asherah or Asherah was their mother. Now, the Yahwist cults would end up persecuting other Canaanite tribes, as the Israelites are also a Canaanite tribe, and in turn would separate themselves from the Canaanites in regards to building a new religion. Now, within Judaism, it was diverse within its belief. The Yahwist cults became the most dominant, especially by the Second Temple period. So, what actions made Jesus call this deity Yahweh the devil? Well, let's start with Judges 11.29. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. He went through Gilead and Manasseh, and returned to Mizpah in Gilead, and went on to Ammon. Jephthah promised the Lord, if you give me victory over the Ammonites, I will burn as an offering the first person that comes out of my house to meet me. So this is a human sacrifice. After victory, when Jephthah went back home to Mizpah, this is Judges 11.34, there was his daughter coming out to meet him, dancing and playing the tambourine. She was his only child. When he saw her, he tore his clothes in sorrow and said, "O my daughter, you are breaking my heart. Why must it be you that causes me pain? I have made a solemn promise to the Lord, and I cannot take it back." So if you offered something to sacrifice to Yahweh, you could not take it back. She said to him, "If you have made a promise to the Lord, do what you have said you would do to me, since the Lord has given you revenge on your enemies," as he was a war god. The Ammonites. But she asked her father, "Do this one thing for me. Leave me alone for 2 months, so that I can go with my friends to wander in the mountains and grieve that I must die a virgin," which would be aged 9 to 14 back then. He told her to go and sent her away for 2 months. She and her friends went up into the mountains and grieved, because she was going to die unmarried and childless. After 2 months, she came back to her father. He did what he had promised the Lord, and she died still a virgin. So he burnt her as a human sacrifice. Let's continue. Now let's go read Leviticus 27.28. No one may sell or buy back what he has unconditionally dedicated to the Lord, whether it is a human being, an animal, or land. It belongs permanently to the Lord. Not even a human being who has been unconditionally dedicated may be bought back. He must be put to death. So he, right here. Now, this being said, the women, in most cases, if they were of Israelite origin, were usually offered to the temple. In the case of Jafar, he promised the first person that came out of his house to greet him, so his daughter. Now, here you cannot take back a sacrifice. Jesus rejected human sacrifice, and he spoke of God rejecting human sacrificing and rejecting animal sacrifice. So here we have a different God. This contradicts the sayings of Jesus. Now let's go read Exodus 29.18. Burn the whole ram on the altar as a food offering. The odour of this offering pleases me. Now, Yahweh here enjoys the smell of his own creation. So, a blood offering. So, a blood sacrifice. Now, he was viewed as eating the offerings. This would go for human sacrifice as well. So, this God was also called a man-eater in the Gospel of Philip. Now, Yahweh, of which accepts human sacrifice and animal sacrificing, Jesus of which spoke of a God that rejects human sacrificing and rejects animal sacrifices. Young girls were also offered to the temple, and in most cases they were auctioned off to be holy brides and brides, of which the holy brides were given to the upper class, the high priest and the kings of Judea, and the nobility. Now, priestesses and virgin brides were called doves. Now, this is in reference to their virginity and sacredness and purity, as the dove was associated with virginity, purity, and was also associated with goddesses. Now, in the Proto-Gospel of James, we have a story of the Virgin Mary being offered to the temple by her parents and being raised as a virgin bride, to be auctioned off to someone of nobility, of worthiness and stature, as it was believed sacred brides would have the potential to carry the next Messiah, the Son of God. And Son of God in Hebrew, meaning a human being with a personal, special relationship with God, and someone who has a greater understanding of the law and the text and a greater understanding of God. Now let's go read Numbers 31.32 to 35. The following is a list of what was captured by the soldiers in addition to what they kept for themselves. 675,000 sheep and goats, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 virgins. This is spoils of war. The half share of the soldiers was 337,500 sheep and goats, of which 675 were the tax for the Lord, Yahweh, to be sacrificed to him. 36,000 cattle for the soldiers, of which 72 were the tax for the Lord. 30,500 donkeys for the soldiers, of which 61 were the tax for the Lord, and 16,000 virgins for the soldiers, so forcing the marriages, of which 32 were the tax for the Lord. So 32 virgins are a tax for the Lord to either be sacrificed or placed in the temple as virgin brides for the nobility. So after this is mentioned, keep in mind now that the Virgin Mary was raised in the temple as a virgin bride. So Jesus goes to the temple and he takes it over in honour of his mother. He challenged the sex trade. We will find this in Matthew 21.12. So this is Jesus goes to the temple. Jesus went into the temple and drove out all those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and stalls of those who sold the doves, the flock of doves, Pleiades, being priestesses, virgin brides, and also the sacrificial animals. So here, virgin brides were being sold. And said to them, it is written in the scripture that God said, my temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations, for all people. But you are making it a hideout, a spalion, which also means a grotto, a cave, and oracles did drugs in caves. For thieves, not the right word. Kephthis is thief. This is leston, coming from the word leistus, meaning pirate, human trafficker, meaning rebel, guerrilla fighter, revolutionary. So he's calling them predators, pirates of children. The blind and the crippled came to him in the temple, and he healed them. The chief priests and the teachers of the law became angry when they saw the wonderful things he was doing. And the children, shouting in the temple, praised David's son. The children were praising Jesus from saving them from the sex trade. The prostitutes associated with Jesus were victims of the sex trade that Jesus in turn saved and liberated. Now Yahweh punishes children for three generations. Jesus saves children. Those of the Yahweh cults were very harmful towards children. Now, this is why Jesus challenged this trade. He challenged the religious authority. He challenged the political authority. And this is why he was killed. He was crucified as a rebel because he rebelled against the authority. So let's go read the temple scene again, but in Mark 11.15. And they all come to Jerusalem. And when they entered the temple, he began to drive out all those selling and those buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and seats of those selling the flock of doves. And he would not permit that anyone should carry a vessel through the temple or through the temple courtyards. Now, this vessel was a vessel containing the drugs used to drug up the young girls so they produced visions. They'd be holy brides, prophetesses in their own rights, and in turn would conceive the next Messiah or Son of God. So with the actions of Jesus, we see a different approach to Yahweh who punishes children. The Yahweh's cults that sell children that Jesus challenged. This is why he called Yahweh the devil. This is what Christians aren't taught, and this is what this channel brings you. So that way you can have a glimpse of what's really going on and have a glimpse at Gnosticism, as Gnosticism was the most peaceful form of Christianity. Now, another thing I want to mention, that in the ancient past was there were no children's rights. It wasn't until the 3rd century that Christians introduced them into the Roman Empire, being the Gnostic Christians that were standing up for the rights of children. They were against slavery. They were for equality of men and women and children. They themselves wanted to be like Jesus themselves, to be Christ-like, and to make this world a better place. Thank you for joining us here on this video discussion. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe as it helps the channel grow, and feel free to leave a comment on videos that you would like to see discussed. Peace and love.